serve in the church and take off and go to the temple when they needed to and so forth. So they wanted to be their own bosses, so to speak. So they decided, they looked around town, what business could we do here in Ajo? Well, Grandpa Lewis in the summertime had gone up to Prescott, Arizona in the summertime where it was a lot cooler, and he did a little bit of dairy work up there, meaning worked with some people that had a dairy up there, had some cows, and they made some milk and delivered milk, and he spent some time with that business. And Grandma Lewis, her father, had the New Modern Dairy in Globe, so she had a lot of experience with the dairy, yes.
You know what the name is called?
What?
Desert Dairy?
Well, not in Globe. I'm getting to that.
Oh.
I'm getting to that. Not yet, but you're right. So it was called the New Modern Dairy in Globe, and Grandma Lewis had run the routes, and she knew all about dairies. So there was a little dairy in Ajo, and what was the name of it, JC?
Desert Dairy.
The Desert Dairy. And Grandpa and Grandma decided, let Mrs. Davies that owns that dairy, she is getting kind of old, and maybe she would be willing to sell the dairy to us. So let's start saving our money. When we have enough money to put down some cash, we could go to her and say, Mrs. Davies, we'd like to buy your dairy. Would you consider selling to us? So they started saving every penny they could. And they saved up some money. And one day, Grandpa was the branch president in Ajo, and every Sunday at the end of the month, he would get a report from the home teachers who had done their home teaching visits. They called it ward teaching back then. Who had done their ward teaching visits and who hadn't. And he always said we should always be 100% in our ward teaching and visiting teaching. So he got a report from all the supervisors in the branch, and they said, well, there was one home teacher that didn't do his home teaching. And it was the last day of the month, and it was late at night on a Sunday night, and Grandpa thought, one route, or at least one family I know, I think it was several, but anyway, Grandpa and Grandma didn't have a car because they were saving money to buy the dairy. So Grandpa decided, I guess I better go do my home teaching. So he didn't even have a companion. He just walked up in Gibson. If you know Ajo, Grandma knows where Gibson is.
It was a long ways away. It was a long walk.
It was a long walk up to Gibson to visit this one family that wasn't home taught for the month. And when he went into that man who really wasn't active in the church and really didn't want home teachers, but anyway, he went anyway. He, just as he was leaving, after they had a prayer, he was leaving. And the man said to him, oh, by the way, Malin, did you hear that the Desert Dairy is for sale? And Dad said, no, I did not know that. He said, yes, I heard today that Mrs. Davies is selling the Desert Dairy and that she has already contacted somebody to sell the dairy. And Grandpa thought, oh no, we've been saving our money to buy the dairy. And so he ran all the way home and he said to Grandma Muriel, Mrs. Davies is selling the dairy. We better call her. Well, it was really late at night, and he decided we can't call this late at night. We'll call first thing in the morning. So they went to bed and they could hardly sleep that night. They got up the next morning, and as early as they thought that they could, they called Mrs. Davies. Well, her sister they lived together. They were two widows that lived together and owned the dairy. Mrs. Davies owned the dairy, but her sister lived with her and helped run the dairy. Anyway, her sister answered the phone, and Grandpa Malin said, can I talk to Mrs. Davies? And she said, oh, she's not here. And he said, well, where is she? She said, well, she's in Phoenix. She said, she's selling the dairy, and she's up there with her attorney, her lawyer, and they're drawing up the papers to sell the dairy to somebody that lives in Phoenix and is going to move down to Ajo to run the dairy. And Malin said, my dad said, can I have the phone number of the attorney where she's at? And she said, well, I guess so. So she gave him the name and the phone number of the attorney or the lawyer in Phoenix. And shh, are you listening to my story?
It's really exciting. She's at the lawyer's
Phoenix
office.
is the capital of Arizona, right?
Phoenix is the capital of Arizona, and the attorney. And so he called the attorney and Mrs. and the secretary that answered said, "Well, the attorney, the lawyer, is not available. He's in a meeting." He said, "Well, who's he in a meeting with?" Said Mrs. Davies, and he said, "Well, I must speak to the attorney." She said, "Well, all right." And they said to the attorney, "You have an emergency phone call from Otto." And so the attorney got on and said, "Yes." He said, "This is Malin Lewis, and I want to buy that dairy." And he said, "Well, you're too late. We've already drawn up the papers to sell it to somebody else."